hindsight bias is a tendency to see the events that have already happened as more predictable than they were before they took place. In 2009, there was this group of scientists that gathered in Italy, and they were tasked to predict the likelihood of a severe earthquake in one of the ancient cities. So these scientists have sat down and they concluded ultimately that it was impossible to predict a severe earthquake. Unfortunately, 6 days later, a major earthquake of 6.3 magnitude hit the region, and ultimately 300 people died as a result. In October 2012, Italian judge had sentenced unfortunate group to 6 years in prison and imposed a fine of 7.8 million in damages for the failure to predict the earthquake. This is an excellent example how hindsight bias affects our justice system. So after the fact, obviously it's easy to see that all these evidence were already there at the time, so the scientists should have foreseen what was coming. Obviously we know that now because we know what the ultimate outcome was. However, what we have to do, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of these experts. They've made an educated guess about what was going to happen, and holding them to account for a failure to predict something so uncertain as this is absolutely bonkers, clearly from the standpoint of a judge. When he already has an overview of all the evidence and all the clues that were available that led to a certain outcome, it is easy for him to say that they should have predicted it. However, the reality is completely different. The best analogy that I can think of to illustrate the hindsight bias is analogy of a maze. Imagine yourself in the maze from the first person's view. As you travel through the maze, you've got many different pathways that you can take, but you don't really know where each pathway is going to lead you to. So the problem with being in the maze from the first person's view is that all we can see is just a couple of steps ahead. We don't really know what's behind the corner. We can presume, we have our assumptions, there are a number of clues that can give us some hints as to what's going to be behind, but ultimately, until we get there, we won't really know what's going to happen. Now imagine yourself standing at the exit of the maze. The huge camera is behind you, and the camera is slowly raising its level, and the entire maze is becoming exposed. This is what the hindsight bias is. From that standpoint, you start to see all the possible ways, all the possible options, and now it becomes clear and obvious why you ended up in this given place. What you can also see, if you were to take a different pathway, you probably ended up with a different outcome, with a different exit. Once you are presented with the outcome, our brain has this amazing ability to sift through our memory and selectively choose and pick information that's going to be the most relevant to support the outcome that you're being presented with. In fact, everything appears inevitable from that standpoint because you can see exactly how each individual event, how each individual decision affected the ultimate goal. But the problem is, looking at the world from that standpoint is unfair because you already know what the outcome was. Whereas people who are in the maze at the time, they don't have that luxury. Life is filled with uncertainties. And the problem is that once you know the outcome of the events, it's easy for you to pinpoint the mistakes and the flaws. So you may want to ask yourself, is there anything at all that I can do to mitigate the impact of hindsight bias on the way we perceive the past events? Research suggests that even when people are made aware of a hindsight bias, and the process being explained to them, it makes no difference in terms of the way it affects their judgment. However, there are a couple of things that you can do to combat hindsight bias. The first thing is, you have to remember that no one has a crystal ball. No one has ability to predict the future. So when you are judging someone's choices and decisions from the past, remember that you have a benefit of hindsight. People who were making the decisions at the time didn't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be. If these people would have known that their choices and their decisions are going to lead to the certain outcome, they would have probably made different choices, different decisions. However, they didn't know at the time because they were in the maze. They didn't see the ultimate outcome. When assessing these decisions, you are outside the maze. You see the entire maze and you know the outcome. So remember about that. It's really hard, but it definitely helps to become more objective. Another thing you can do is try to be more empathetic than judgmental. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the people who are making decisions at the time and think to yourself, how would you feel at the time? Do you really think that these people were making these decisions because they had bad intentions in mind, or because of certain constraints that they were subjected to at the time? Maybe they were under the time pressure. Maybe they haven't slept well on the day. Or maybe there are a number of different reasons why they acted the way they did. Try not to think that the life is simply binary, that there are either right or wrong choices. There are lots of nuances that have to be taken into account, and oftentimes when we judge other people for the behaviors and for the decisions that they've made in the past, we neglect to take into account all the complexities that they were subjected to at the time of making the decisions. And the last thing you can do is to imagine alternative outcomes. I know it's very hard, especially once you're presented with the outcome. Our mind has a tendency to draw conclusions from seemingly obvious evidence. If you lasted that long, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit the like and consider subscribing to our channel for more videos like that. If you're interested in other biases, you may want to consider either that video or that one. Thanks for being with us today. We're signing off.